We at the Canisius Ambassadors for Conservation feel that one of the most important messages we can deliver is that all of us have to be much more careful than we have been about what we pour down our drains. Not too long ago, my neighbor was working on his car in his driveway, so I walked over to say hello. He's a great guy and very good with cars, and I always enjoy talking with him about the interesting things he does while working on his engine. This time, he explained to me that he had just changed the oil, and he bragged to me about the special grade of oil he used and the amount of money he saved by doing it himself. As I looked around at his equipment, I asked, just out of curiosity, what he did with his old oil, and he told me, without any embarrassment or special emphasis, that he had poured the oil down the storm runoff drain in the street right in front of his house. Well, he is a great guy and a friend of mine, so I certainly didn't want to make him feel bad. But inside, I felt just terrible in hearing this. I felt terrible because I knew what happened to that oil once it was poured down the drain, and I knew that actions like that take place all the time, all over our nation. Storm drains that carry rainwater off our streets empty out into our creeks and rivers. Just think about it. Of course they do. It's just that when we live in cities and in suburbs, we sometimes lose connection with that fact. When humans build communities, they temporarily divert rainwater via storm drains. But those drains only carry the water for short distances to locations where they pour out into nearby streams. So what does this mean? Well, let's put this plainly. The next time it rains, my friend's oil will be pushed along by the rainwater down to the nearest stream. My friend is a good guy. He never would walk over to a stream and pour oil into it. The thing is, without knowing it, that is exactly what he did. And the same thing applies to household sanitary drains as well. I remember one time when I was little, I was at my uncle's house and saw him pour some leftover paint thinner down the drain of the utility tub in his basement. So what happens in this case? My uncle felt that once it went into a drain like this, it was out of sight, out of mind. But we should all know better. In this case, the paint thinner flowed through the sanitary sewers underneath the streets, downhill to the city's wastewater treatment plants. Well, America's water treatment plants are very good at removing a lot of elements out of our sewage. But the technology is pretty limited when it comes to removing pollutants like that out of the water. There's a saying in the conservation business that all drains lead to the ocean. This is to remind us that if we care for the health of the ocean, the health of all the wonderful life that lives there, then we need to be much more careful about what we put down our drains. Consider this example. Right now I am filming at a house near Canisius College, which is located in Buffalo, New York. Any pollutant that we put down our drains here goes through the city's water treatment plant on the banks of the beautiful Niagara River. From there, it flows downstream to Lake Ontario and eventually out through the St. Lawrence River to the Atlantic Ocean. And here, right here, directly downstream from us, is a population of beluga whales. And the whales in this area depend upon fish, which depend upon invertebrates and plants that take their nutrients from the water and sediments that flow from us downstream to this Gulf. The terrible thing is that the scientists have shown that many of the whales in this area have accumulated high levels of chemical pollutants in their bodies. And these pollutants did not originate in these areas. They flowed downstream to this area from the American and Canadian cities that flank the Great Lakes. In the past, we used to point to industry as the main source of pollutants, and that was a big problem until fairly recently. But government and industry regulations are now pretty strict, and many industries are now doing a pretty decent job vis-a-vis the environment. The bottom line is that it's time to stop pointing to others as polluters. It's time for each of us as individuals to examine our own behavior in this regard. We have to each ask ourselves, and let's be honest when we do so, how many chemical pollutants did we release into the environment this year, or this week, or today? If you live like most Americans, then you probably have not been ideal citizens of the earth in this regard. Now, I know what I and my family do only amounts to very small infractions. I'm sure my uncle thought it was just a little quantity of paint thinner, just as my neighbor thought that his small quantity of oil was negligible. But there are millions of us. Even if each of us only pour a tiny bit of oil or a small amount of paint thinner down the drains, it ends up amounting to tons of chemical waste flowing through our waterways. Heck, we don't even need to point to whales and other ocean life to worry about this. These are our waterways too. Right now, I am walking through Smokes Creek as it flows through the lovely suburb of Orchard Park, New York. It is a beautiful little waterway that is typical of so many others in North America. As it flows, it joins with other tributaries and makes for a nice little stream that passes through the southern part of the city of Buffalo. And right here, it flows out into the waters of Lake Erie. Now, this point is only about 15 miles from the lovely suburban scene I showed you just a moment ago. But by the time the water gets here, it's so polluted that health officials need to keep this beautiful beach closed from public use. Now, do you know something that's even worse than that? That building over there, that round red brick building, that's the water intake for the drinking water for the city of Buffalo. It's a pretty clear straight line. If we are careless about things like pesticides, oil, and paint thinners, they end up washing downstream right into the water supply that we ourselves drink. So this is an easy one. Clean water is good for all of us. Good for the local wildlife and good for the marine wildlife way downstream. Equally important, it's good for us humans who depend on the water too and critical for our long-term health. So what should we do? Two things. First, we should reduce the amount of pesticides and other chemicals that we use. Now, we know these are fine products. We at conservenature.org are not anti-chemical, but most of us can get along with using less of these things. We really can. If all of us use less, then our shared water is cleaner. It's that simple. We feel that it's time to stop pointing fingers at others. It's time to start being just as responsible as we can in our own behavior. I should use less of these things, and you should use less of these things. Second, when you do have toxins and petrochemicals, you should be very careful about how you dispose of them. For motor oil, this is easy. Just take it in a container to an auto repair shop or parts store. They have special receptacles for used oil so that it can be processed for recycling. For other toxic chemicals, it's a little less easy. Nevertheless, there's a right way and a wrong way. Whatever you do, please don't just take these things and put them in the garbage or down the drain. That's simply releasing a dose of poison to the environment, and that's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to dispose of them at specific toxin collection sites. Nowadays, nearly all cities and towns have periodical events where people can drop off pesticides and other chemicals. Now, it is certainly less convenient than using the regular garbage, but you come away having the satisfaction in knowing you did your part in keeping our waterways clean. Heck, if you want to do more, consider volunteering to help out at one of these chemical collection events. Or you can help advertise in your own community so that more and more people participate in them. The bottom line here is that common, ordinary citizens can be a source of pollution, and it's the responsibility of all of us as individuals to put that to a stop. At the Canisius Ambassadors for Conservation, we believe that if we all act together, we can make the world a better place. We really can.